Hey there, everyone. It's Brad Kenny, Executive Artistic Director here at the Ogunquit Playhouse, and I am joined today by members of the creative team of The Nutty Professor, a new musical. And so I'd like to introduce some of the folks here that we have with us. First up is our director, Mark Rooney, our choreographer, Joanne Hunter, and the incomparable Tony winner, book writer, Mr. Rupert Holmes. So thanks for joining us, everybody. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us here at Ogunquit and for trusting us with this beautiful piece and joining the team. And what would the audiences expect? This is a new musical. So what could they expect to see when they come to see The Nutty Professor, a new musical?
So The Nutty Professor is a musical based on the Jerry Lewis film from the 60s, but has been reimagined for this production specifically so that they can expect a 60s romp, but with a contemporary understanding of interpersonal relations and a story about being true to yourself. It's appropriate for all ages. It's a show that you can bring your family to. It's great fun. It has a classic musical comedy golden age score by one of the great composers of musical theater, the great late Marvin Hamlisch, and the incomparable, and on this very Zoom, Rupert Holmes, writing a book and lyrics. And it has been a great pleasure and honor to get to collaborate with Rupert over the past, we did a reading before the pandemic, and then through the pandemic, we're going back and forth. And then in the process leading up to our rehearsals, Rupert has been taking a look at this with a fine-tooth comb and a new lens, making this a brand new version of this story that has hopefully joy and relevance, and gives a fun night out that has a great story and a great message.
Ditto to what Mark just said. Absolutely. I think that, I've had the pleasure of working with Mark. This is my second venture with Mark, which has been very exciting. And this will be my third adventure with Mr. Rupert Holmes, which I'm grateful for. But it's funny, and I love funny. But like as Mark said, you're going to see the show, the movie that was created by Jerry Lewis, and then later Eddie Murphy doing his take on it. But it's all basically, it's relevant because it still happens, feeling like an outsider and wanting to belong. So but in telling the story, Rupert's created, it's told through humor, which to me is the best way to get a point across, right? And there's phenomenal music, as Mark has said, was by our wonderful Marvin Hamlisch. And there's a lot of dance, a lot of movement. And for me, it's just, I'm in seventh heaven because it also lives in this world. And when I create, it is based on 60, it takes place in the era of the 60s, right? The decade of the 60s. But just because it is a dated period that is in a certain time period of our history doesn't mean it's not relevant now. And what I've done with movement is just make it so that it's accessible today. So there's lots of movement, and hopefully it'll be fun, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. But yeah, so you have to come because I think you should.
I can second that. We've had the privilege of having a couple of weeks of dance pre-production, and Joanne has been in the studio with dancers for 2 weeks. And let me tell you, these numbers are going to knock you out. They are just so joyous and fun and buoyant, and everything that you want out of coming to see a musical comedy.
Wow, great.
Thank you, Mark.
So, Mr. Rupert, tell us from you. It's how fortunate we are to have the man himself who's giving us the words and be able to share. What do you think they're going to see and hear from your perspective?
They're going to see and hear a classic Broadway musical comedy. And the joy of it is that they'll be laughing most of the time, and they'll be dazzled by Joanne's choreography. Not for nothing, Andrew Lloyd Webber had her do School of Rock. And we also have a director, by the way, may I say, beautiful, the Carole King musical that was so heartfelt as it was also so wonderfully tuneful. Um, all that comes to the equation here. And I have been going through the script with a fine tooth comb because it's the actual only use I have for a comb these days, as you may have noticed. But it's all being put to good use. The thing is, Nutty Professor is kind of going to be like the wonderful discovery that dark chocolate is good for you. We love dark chocolate. Who doesn't love dark chocolate? And yet we find out that it's actually, we can eat it conscience free because it's doing us good. And Nutty Professor is a very touching story, oddly enough, even as it's hilarious. And it's founded upon issues that we deal with so strongly today about being comfortable in your own skin, about feeling out of the crowd and finding out that there are pitfalls to just becoming whatever the crowd demands you become, and finding yourself in all that. And it's more than ever, we've been able to transform the character of Stella so that it is a story about two people who are not in sync with the conformist world of 1960, and how they try to find not only how they can be themselves in that time, but how they can find each other as well. I researched this quite heavily by being alive in the 1960s. That was a good idea on my part, I think. It showed great foresight on myself as a teenager. And it was not a great time to be an individualist. There were very narrow concepts of what someone being attractive was. If you wore these glasses, you were out of the running for everything. You couldn't be a sports star, you couldn't be an actor. That was it for you. You'd be a librarian, and that's what you would be. There were no designer glasses, and people had now this is pre-Beatles, remember, pre-Beatles, and people had a very narrow idea of what you should be to get along in the world. And Nutty Professor is a completely giddy experiment in terms of how you could find yourself the most popular person in the world, and yet find that you haven't found the real true you. So there's a lot in it that is heartfelt and meaningful to today, and also it's dazzling. It's going to be I've worked with Joanne. I've been so privileged to on a number of shows, and she just hits it out of the park every single time, every single number. There's never a moment that isn't electrifying. So lucky audience to see all this, I think, and right. We're grateful to the audience too. But you'll hear some beautiful tunes, some of the best tunes Marvin Hamlish ever wrote. Marvin Hamlish of a thing called A Chorus Line. He kind of wrote that, and The Way We Were, and Nobody Does It Better, and nobody ever did it better than Marvin in terms of a Broadway sound for a Broadway show that we're going to have the privilege of raising in Algonquin. So that's my take. I'm going. I bought my ticket already.